I've trusted the same lawyer for 30 years. Last week, I called her just to hear my own will read back to me, one more time, for peace of mind. Instead, she went quiet on the phone and told me something didn't add up. My name is Douglas Kane. I'm 76, a retired pharmacist from Albuquerque, New Mexico. I called my attorney, Corinne Baxter, expecting a quiet, ordinary phone call. Instead, her voice came through careful in a way I'd never heard from her before. Douglas, there's a document sitting on my desk right now that doesn't make sense to me. It has your name on it, but I never drew it up and I never saw you sign it. My stomach dropped before I even understood what she meant. Corinne, what kind of document? Something that changes how your money and your house get divided up when you're gone. Filed 6 weeks ago, through some office across town I've never worked with. Douglas, did you go see another lawyer recently, without telling me? No, I said slowly. I haven't been anywhere. Corinne, what's going on? She didn't answer right away. And in that silence, I understood, somehow, before she said a single word more, that whatever she was about to tell me was going to change how I looked at somebody I loved for the rest of my life. Then somebody signed your name for you, she said quietly. Douglas, I checked the signature page carefully before I called you. It wasn't forged exactly. It's your son. He signed it. On your behalf, using that paper you gave him a few years back that lets him step in and handle things for you if you're ever too sick to do it yourself. Craig, my own son. I sat down slowly at my kitchen table, the same table he'd eaten breakfast at every morning of his childhood. Corinne, that paper was only ever for emergencies. If I got sick, if I couldn't manage things myself. Not for changing what happens to everything I've saved. I know, she said carefully. And normally, someone using that kind of authority isn't allowed to make changes that end up benefiting themselves. Not unless you gave clear, separate permission for exactly that, in writing. I need to see both documents side by side. Can you come in tomorrow? I barely slept that night, lying awake thinking back over the last several months. And once I started looking, things I'd let slide before started standing out clearly. Craig had been struggling for over a year, ever since a business he'd invested heavily in started falling apart. He'd started visiting more, always kind, always helpful, insisting on handling my mail whenever he came by so I wouldn't have to deal with the clutter. He'd asked, more than once, casual questions about how everything was set up between him and his sister, Rachel, in my estate plan, always brushing it off as simple curiosity whenever I asked why he wanted to know. 3 months earlier, he'd mentioned bringing some paperwork by for me to sign, something about updating my information with the bank, using the power of attorney I'd given him years before, back when I'd had a health scare and wanted someone able to step in if I ever couldn't manage things myself. I hadn't thought much of it at the time. I trusted him completely. At Corinne's office the next morning, she laid both documents out on her desk. The original paperwork, drawn up years earlier in her own office, let Craig step in and handle my bills and my accounts if I ever couldn't. But it was clear about one thing. Anything that ended up putting money in his own pocket needed my direct, separate okay first, in writing. The new paperwork, filed through an office I'd never heard of, cut my daughter Rachel's share nearly in half and moved the difference over to Craig, along with control of the house here in Albuquerque. Craig had signed all of it on my behalf. There was nothing in the file showing I'd ever agreed to any of it. Douglas, this looks like your son helping himself to your money using authority you only ever gave him to help you, Corinne said. That's not allowed. Not without you agreeing to it yourself, clearly, in writing. Whoever handled this at that other office either didn't check properly or didn't want to. I felt something crack open in my chest, sitting in that office, looking at numbers and percentages that represented 40 years of careful saving, all quietly redirected without me ever knowing a single thing about it. Corinne connected me that same afternoon with an elder law attorney she trusted, a sharp, methodical man named Felix Ruiz, who specialized in exactly this kind of dispute. He reviewed everything within the hour. Mr. Kane, this can be challenged and undone. Your son wasn't allowed to change things in his own favor without your direct written okay, and he didn't have it. But before we file anything, I want to understand what he was really thinking. Sometimes this comes from panic and bad advice. Sometimes it doesn't. Felix suggested I let Craig believe nothing had changed yet, at least until we understood exactly what he'd been planning to do next. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, sitting through an ordinary Sunday dinner with Craig and his wife, Paula, 2 days later, nodding along as they talked about ordinary things, while that paperwork sat in a file folder on Felix's desk with my son's signature standing in for mine. What Felix found next wasn't what either of us expected. Running a background check on the outside law firm that had filed the amendment, he discovered it wasn't a real estate planning practice at all, just a small storefront office that had filed 3 nearly identical amendments over the past 2 years, each one for a different elderly client, each one signed by an adult child acting under an old power of attorney, each one quietly redirecting a larger share to whichever child had brought in the paperwork. "Douglas, I don't think Craig came up with this on his own," Felix said. "I think somebody sold him on it. There's a pattern here bigger than just your family." That detail changed something in me, hearing it. Part of me had been furious at my son alone. Learning he'd been handed a ready-made scheme, one apparently already used against at least 2 other families in the city, made the anger sharper in a different direction and made me more determined than ever to see this stopped properly, not just patched over quietly within our own 4 walls. 2 weeks later, Craig asked to stop by the house to help me organize some paperwork, the same phrase he'd used the day he'd first brought over that power of attorney years before. Felix suggested I let him come, with a small recorder placed discreetly on the bookshelf in my living room, the same room where Craig had done his homework as a boy. Craig and Paula sat down with me that afternoon, and after a while, Craig stepped into the kitchen to make coffee, leaving Paula alone with me for a few minutes. "Once everything settles, we'll finally be able to breathe again," Paula said, almost gently, like she was confiding in an old friend rather than the man whose estate she was discussing. "Craig didn't want to worry you with the details. That lawyer's office said this is how families handle it all the time. Once the papers are filed, nobody ever really checks. He just figured it was easier this way." "Easier for who?" I asked quietly. She paused, seeming to realize, a beat too late, what she'd actually said out loud. "For everyone, Dad." "Really?" I sat with that answer a long moment, my chest tight, thinking about Rachel, who had no idea any of this had happened at all, and about the version of easier that apparently meant deciding my own estate for me without a single word of my input. Felix had that recording, along with the pattern of similar filings from that same storefront office, filed as part of a formal legal challenge within the week. Given the clear self-dealing and lack of any written authorization from me, the case moved through the courts faster than either of us expected. At the hearing, 2 months later, the judge reviewed the original power of attorney's language, the recorded conversation, and Felix's findings on the other elderly clients affected by that same office, and didn't take long to rule. The amendment was voided entirely, restoring my original trust exactly as it had been. The judge also referred the matter to the district attorney's office, both for Craig's individual actions and for a broader investigation into the storefront firm itself, given the apparent pattern affecting multiple families. Craig was eventually charged with financial exploitation of an elder and breach of fiduciary duty. He avoided jail time through a plea agreement, given his cooperation once confronted with the evidence, but received several years of probation and was ordered to pay back the legal costs the estate had incurred fighting the amendment, along with permanently losing his authority under the power of attorney. The storefront office was shut down entirely once the DA's broader investigation confirmed the same scheme had been used against 2 other elderly clients in the city, both of whom were later able to have their own estates corrected because of what Felix uncovered in mine. It's been almost a year now. Craig and I are slowly working through what's left between us, careful, honest conversations that carry none of the ease we used to share before all this. Rachel and I have grown closer through it, strangely enough, both of us learning together exactly how close we'd come to losing something neither of us had ever agreed to lose in the first place. Last month, I sat down again in Corinne's office, this time with both Craig and Rachel present, and asked her to read my will and trust back to me one more time, slowly, clause by clause, with everyone in the room hearing exactly the same words at exactly the same moment. When she finished, nobody said anything for a long moment. Then Craig spoke, quiet, careful. "That's fair, Dad. That's exactly how it should be. It wasn't everything. It wasn't close to fixing what had broken between us. But hearing my own son say those words, out loud, in front of his sister, in the same office where all of this truth had first come to light, felt like the first real step back towards something worth rebuilding. If this story got to you, Hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe for more. I'll see you in the next one.